So my passion around natural resources and conservation had really to do with how do we empower people through the many resources that God has blessed us with. And I found that I was running into a lot of obstacles when I tried to share information that can help improve the lives of so many. It started here in the Bahamas. And then I said, it was a little confusing to me because those who were controlling the conservation environment in the Bahamas were mainly families of the colonial descent. And that is what really took me on a global journey of searching the root behind the typical conservation arena that is practiced. So what you find when you think of Africa, North and Central America, those who control the main areas of the economy, they central around, controlling the education or miseducation about resources in a country. And so that is how they scout out the wealth with the research. And so when I came forward, very excited to share information about how Bahamians can be empowered through giving them the skills in ecotourism, whether it be fly fishing, bird watching, nature-based tourism, using these resources in a sustainable way. Like I said, it was met with opposition by such families. So then I began to say, well, uh, who else is in the world? And Kenya was the first country that I began to look at. And then I began to look at Botswana, other countries. And that is what took me on a global journey about 30 years ago when I saw that here was various countries in Africa where people were being driven off their land because of the various mineral resources. So I began to do more and more in-depth research where, most of the gold, the copper, the diamond, and I found that it just kept coming up outside of Europe. And I began to do more research. I said, well, if all of these resources are showing up outside of Europe, how is it that Africa, the history of people being enslaved, being brought to the Caribbean, whether it's the Bahamas, whether it's Haiti or Jamaica, what is the real reason behind it? And what was so liberating for me, I grew up as a child thinking that the enslavement of Africans, all of the miseducation about being inferior and so forth, and it was all just, one of the many distractions used to keep us from understanding the true reasons behind it. So my passion for conservation has always included the human component. How do we use such resources to empower people no matter where they are, using them in a sustainable way? And exactly what is still happening on the continent of Africa is happening throughout the entire Caribbean. You find those who are in control of the economies, be it in Jamaica, be it in the Bahamas or Trinidad and Tobago, you will find it is resources and how those resources are moved, and so who's controlling your ports. They are all linked together because everything has to move through some seaport or airport at the end of the day. And so you will find whether you go into South Africa or you come here in the Bahamas, the colonial offshoots from the various countries that colonized Africa, enslaved Africa, are those who, control the Caribbean region, whether they took Africans to Brazil, whether they took them into South Carolina, and in different parts of the United States. So we know the history, 400 years of it, 500 years and more, but it's always been about resources. And so for me, the passion behind is how do you bring about a true conservation model? Because if local people are not empowered through these resources, not in the way it's typically extracted, destroying the environment, destroying the freshwater lands, destroying, the permanent destruction to the environment. Because there are ways you can get resources. You can do it in a way that does not leave this permanent path of destruction behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So I want to thank you again for that sharing. It is very important. Like I said before, it is important that we understand that you didn't just wake up and you start talking about resources and what has been happening in Africa in relation to the resources, because the people in Africa, a lot of us are suffering because of the resources that we have. Not really the resources per se, because the resources do not bring suffering. It is the wickedness of some other persons who want to take the resources that create suffering, so that people don't understand it like they say it's a curse. No, it's not a curse, it's a blessing. But if we
Yes.
don't understand how to use it, or maybe we are killing other people because we want to take their resources, that is why people interpret it to be a curse. Now, a lot of things actually came to my mind when you were doing the explanation just now, when you were explaining why you are doing what you are doing, in that we perhaps have been miseducated about even the concept of the land, the resources that we have. Now, we don't know who owned the land anymore. It appears like what happened in Zimbabwe, that somebody came from England. He said he is the owner of the land in Zimbabwe. His ancestors have never been there. But by virtue of their law in England, he became the owner of Zimbabwe. That is just an example, but that is actually the reality all across Africa, because Zimbabwe now we do a land reform. They reform their law. Because now, if we understand that this is our land, then when we are taking the resources from it, we should respect the owner of the land, who are actually the landlord, as it were. So in this sense, I think this work that you are doing is extremely important, because surrounding it are a lot of arguments, from politics to economy to our culture. Where are we going to start from to even begin to understand that when we are talking of these resources, we are talking of the life, the existence, and the survival of the people in question? Where are we going to start this?
What you're saying is it's so important over here, because we can't fail at this, because even those who created this economic model, inevitably they're actually destroying themselves by having such an imbalance. And if you look at the various, I would call it, imagine being a very sophisticated thieves. You come up with structures that says, you have deeds to the land, stealing by any means necessary. And so there is no attitude or about being fair. So I want to get the diamonds from you, but I don't want to pay for it. The evil part of it is the process what it took to miseducate our people, that it is something other than what is really happening.